Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 70 with Amanda Holden. Hello, my people. Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. My name is Tess Wicks. I am your host if you're new here, and thanks for being new here. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on stumbling upon this, being inquisitive about your personal finances, and looking for some girlfriends who you want to just eavesdrop on their conversations about this stuff. It's good stuff. I promise you that. It's not boring or dull or dry, and it can actually help you in your life. At least that's a testimonial I would love to read someday. Today, we have a really, really long show, but I promise you it is going to be one of the most entertaining episodes of the Wander Wealthy Podcast to date. I can't even explain why. It's just, I had so much fun recording it. Probably because of my guest, though. I can't take credit. It's definitely Miss Amanda Holden, which is even weird to say her name because she goes by the name Dumpster Doggy. She is the writer and blogger and speaker, and her blog is called the Dumpster Dog Blog, but she also has this great social media persona. She likes to dress up as old ladies and in a lot of other ridiculous costumes, and she just really loves explaining finances and especially investments in a way that is scrappy and fun and just, a little bit different, which is totally my jam. We had so much fun talking, and I think we talked for way, way longer than we were supposed to. It was 5 a.m. for me. She definitely gave me my jolt of caffeine that I hadn't had yet, and we just laughed our asses off. It was so much fun. So let me introduce you to Amanda Holden. Like I said, she is the blogger behind the Dumpster Dog blog, but she also has a business called Invested Development, where she educates young women about investing, money, and long-term financial planning using humor and a no bullshit approach, which I can completely attest to. I'm going to be linking to several of her blog posts in the show notes, so make sure you go check those out after you listen to this entire podcast episode, because I promise you, you're going to learn a lot. We get into some details, some of the nitty gritty, and by the way, we're talking all about investing, if you didn't know from the title, but we do get into the details, and I think it's stuff that if you go back and you listen to this episode a couple times, and you don't have to listen to the whole thing, but if you listen to it and you really commit, you will learn so much more than you thought. Plus, supplementing that with reading some of these blog posts that I'm going to be linking in the show notes, you will come out of this process so much more wise around investing and understanding what you really can do with your finances. With that little, $100 that you're socking away every month into your 401k, what that can really actually do for you, and how to not crap your pants when stuff hits the fan. If you know what I mean. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't even ramble on anymore because it would be an entire waste of your time because we got to get into this podcast episode. But let me just tell you, in order to get to the show notes, if you're listening to this on a podcast player, go to the description and click on the link. But you can also go to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 70. That's episode 70. So without further ado, here it is, episode number 70 with Amanda Holden. Amanda, Dumpster Dog, Candy, Cane Land, which I wasn't going to say your real Skype username, so I had to come up with something else, but it kind of rhymes with that. How are you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing very well, thank you. And you know what? You can tell the people it's Mandy Cane. My nickname is Mandy. Mandy Cane often comes out during the holiday season. It's festive. We like it. It's okay. But I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. I've been mostly social media stalking you for quite some time in probably the most creepy way, but I'm so happy to have someone who has such a unique voice in the personal finance internets of the world. So I've gone ahead and done your mostly professional bio, but I would love for you to tell us your story. And I know it could probably get a little long, but people are wondering, what's this dumpster dog stuff? Where do you come from, and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So I think for the sake of the podcast, it makes sense to start after I graduated school. So after I graduated, I went and worked for an investment management firm. in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my job there, primarily for most of my years there, I was working as an investment counselor. So it was my job basically to hold the hands of old rich white dudes all day. But really what I was doing is keeping them apprised of portfolio strategy or changes, answering questions about the stock market, getting to know their personal financial situations. And so that was my job. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years. It was a really great job for a young person, a young woman. I was one of very few women in my department at the time. And so I learned a ton, but to be honest, Tess, I kind of fucking hated it. And so what I ended up doing was getting to a point, it was really a breaking point for me where I just decided, you know what, I need to get out of here. And so I started saving all of my money, and I went through this entirely scrappy phase. And Dumpster Dog is actually a nickname from that time in my life. I had a lot of guy friends that I worked with at the investment management firm. And during this time when I was going through this basically like no spend, absolutely spending on like nothing at all, trying to save so I could quit and ultimately travel, the guys that I was working with started calling me Dumpster Dog. And part of the reason for that was I was also super scrappy about food. When I was saving up all this money and trying to get out of there, at one point I was like, I was talking to my friend and I was like, I just don't know that I'm going to be able to do this. I don't know that I'm going to be able to save enough. And she's like, Mandy, she's like, why don't you just get in there and eat some trash? And I was like, well, do explain what you mean by that, friend. And she was like, you know what? She had just watched this documentary on like living off the excess of others. And she was like, you work with 200 guys, like eat their leftovers, like take advantage of all like the work potlucks that are happening every day. And so I would do just that. And I certainly wasn't setting out to like not spend any money on food, but because I had decided that I was going to take on this additional challenge of saving as much money on food as possible, the guys nicknamed me Dumpster Dog. Anyways, so I leave, I quit, I end up going and traveling. I was traveling for about a year in Latin America. And at that point, I thought I was going to pivot out of finance altogether. I really didn't want to be talking about money all day. And while I was there, I kind of decided, okay, maybe it's not necessarily the talking about money that I don't want to do. It's talking about money on my terms and with the people that I want to talk about money with. And so I decided to come back to the United States. I came back to Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, and I currently am, and have started my blog, which is the Dumpster Dog blog. I've also started a business called Invested Development, and the primary focus of both of those is to get all this information that I learned at the investment management firm and deliver it to the demographic that I actually care most about, and that just happens to be young women. And so that's where we are today.
That's amazing. I was reading your story and I was just like, yes, this girl has balls of steel.
Oh, well, thank you.
So how much did you end up saving from doing this dumpster dogness?
So I saved $30,000 in 8 months. And that was from saving during that 8-month period. But I should also say I did sell my car at the end. So that was like another additional, I don't know what it was, like $4,000, $5,000. And so between both of those sources, I ended up saving $30,000 and leaving for Latin America with $30,000.
This could take us down like a huge rabbit hole, but I love that you sold your car at the end. You did things that a lot of people just don't do, not because like they necessarily feel that they need all this stuff, which I guess they probably do feel like they need all this stuff. And I mean, what is your advice to people who are sitting here going, I could never do that? Or do you tell people like, okay, you need to eat trash? Or what is more like the story from this for other people to take and apply to their personal lives? And then what would you tell the people who are like, oh, well, I can't do this because, and they're just making up the excuses of why they wouldn't be able to sell their car or why they wouldn't be able to, step back in other aspects of their life when it comes to their spending?
Well, I'm a little bit reticent to ever say that somebody should follow exactly my advice, because the reality is there's also a lot of privilege embedded into my story, right? Like at that point, I didn't have debt, I didn't have student loans, I didn't have children. And so for me to sell my car and sell everything I owned and uproot and leave for a year, it wasn't that hard. It was also not that hard for me because, to be totally honest, I hated my job so much that I felt like I had no other choice. And I'm sympathetic that not everybody is in a position where not only are they so mobile, but they may have more conflicted feelings about their job. Whereas I had like very strong feelings and, in fact, I felt like if I stayed where I was, I was going to hurt myself emotionally. I was drinking a lot. It was kind of an unsafe lifestyle for me, to be totally honest. And so what I never intended for that dumpster dog story to be was any sort of prescription for anybody else's life. I think a nice takeaway from the story is, hey, you know what? I did it. I shut off the consumption, which was certainly not easy because I was very unhappy at the time. And consumption, such as whatever it is, imbibing or shopping or eating, is what you want to do when you get off of 12-hour workday or 14-hour workday and you're miserable, right? But what I would encourage people to do is to, try to pare back some of that consumption, because what I did learn from the experience is the way that consumption can get in the way of these bigger, greater financial goals. My goal at the time happened to be traveling for a year, but your goal could be retirement or early retirement or starting your own business or whatever else it might be that gives you a greater sense of freedom. Because I think at the root of it, and what I wish everybody could understand, and I think most people do understand this on some level, but it's hard to enact it in your everyday life, is that money equals freedom, right? Saving and investing equals freedom. And so if you are spending all of your money, the more that you're going to have to work. The less you spend your money, the less you have to work. And so really that's the takeaway from the dumpster dog story.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it's just important for people when they're reading any sort of, financial advice or personal finance anecdote by someone who's just sharing their story, is like there's always something to learn from it, but it's not necessarily going to apply directly to your life. Like everything is relative, but take what you can from it. And I think, from your story, it's just that you had to challenge yourself in a way so that you could, first of all, like revert your focus from hating your job to having some more purpose elsewhere. Maybe that's just the prescription I apply to you, but I think that it's always good to have like an alternative goal that can keep you focused and happy, as opposed to just like making it through the work week. But then you also had to challenge yourself to figure out what constraints you had to pull in on your life. Whereas I feel like that's what people can really take away, is like, okay, something's got to give here. Finance inevitably ends up being a zero-sum game, like unless I'm just going to go into debt all the time. And like you said, it breaks down to very simple things like save more money or stop spending so much, retire earlier, spend all you want, push back those dates of, maybe it's not even retirement, but push back the dates of your goals because you're just not going to achieve them as quickly.
No, and I love that you said that, because that's so true as well. And this is something I do highlight in the story, which is the idea of reverting that focus to a financial goal. And it's so difficult on the day to day, but it's really addicting to start saving and to see that saving actually add up, and to be able to start thinking about what it is that those goals are in like a more tangible way. And so, yeah, I love that. I agree.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me to the next question, which is like, I really want to talk about the hard stuff, because you can't just be like, oh yeah, I just started eating trash and it was no big deal and everyone was cool with it and I felt really good about myself, because there's obviously going to be some resistance in there. And maybe you are like quite shameless and you're just like, I can do this and I don't really give a shit what anyone thinks. But what sort of resistance did you have, especially as you were like, I need to keep doing this until you get to that point where, I kind of compare it to writer's block. Like like you're not going to want to do it or want to do it. But then once you start getting the words on paper or the money in your bank account, then it's, motivation is a little bit easier to keep. But like the resistance that came up, especially at the beginning, but even throughout the entire process, how did you handle that and get over it?
So I would say that very generally, this is obvious, not spending money for 8 months is hard. Did I never spend money? No. Like I would still like go out and get a beer with a friend. What I did eliminate was like, for instance, shopping had to go. So like I went cold turkey on shopping, for instance. And shopping, I would not say is my vice. I would say like going out, drinking and eating, those are like more my vices. But even still, like anybody that tells you that quitting shopping cold turkey, especially as a woman, is easy is lying to you, right? Like there is so much temptation to spend every single corner you turn. I mean, it's like a minefield out there, right? And so anybody that says it's difficult is definitely lying. That, and then of course there's like constant fear of missing out. This was like luckily a little bit before like the Instagram era where like every single beautiful woman you knew in like a white caftan and hat was like on some tropical island. And so it wasn't quite to that degree. But there's always going to be fear of missing out. And then there's always going to be specific pressures on women to spend money. And like one of the things that I eliminated was pretty much all spending on beauty, which again, I don't spend a ton of money on beauty to begin with, but also it feels weird to relinquish that and to give that up. And it really takes some soul searching to be okay with that. And so I would say that those are kind of like the more obvious hard stuff to get over. I think that in general, the more difficult part of it is believing that like you're giving up your place in your career, right? Mm-hmm. Feeling like if I take a year off, like all hell will break loose. I'll never be able to get back into the corporate world. I'll lose my spot. Nobody will care. I won't be able to get a job again. What am I doing with my life? Those types of more existential questions that are totally overblown, because the reality is we're going to be working for another 40 years, and taking 1 year off is certainly not the end of the world, at least in my opinion. And especially for me as somebody that, and maybe I learned this while I was traveling, but I've always had an inkling of this. Like I'm probably not going to like try to climb the corporate ladder and become a CFO or, be a person like that. And so it totally ended up being okay, but you do kind of battle these internal thoughts about whether you're making the right decision for your career and whether you're completely spoiling it moving forward.
Yeah, that's really good. I didn't even think about obviously I went through that similar transition from this corporate life or the job that I had and career to like build it up. Like that was the entire process, was like, take all these exams, continue to climb up. And then to leave, it's like you have to check your ego at the door, because once you set your eye on something else, it's like you have to go after it. Otherwise you're going to constantly be asking your question, like, am I making a big mistake?
Right. Like I remember a very distinct conversation with my dad where he was like, but you have such a good job. Why are you leaving your job? It's such a good job. And like, I just was like, I don't know how to tell you this, Dad, but your daughter's probably going to be like cobbling together some just like a really weird employment for the next 40 years. So you should probably just get used to it now. I don't think that this was the right path for me.
Yeah.
And not to like jump way ahead, but I am happier now, and I arguably don't have as good of a career, but I'm doing something that I care about, which is helping young women. And so it all ended up okay for me. Of course, there are still some moments where I'm like, sure wish I had a corporate job in healthcare and regular paycheck. Yes. And all of those things. I mean, of course, like anybody who's a self-employed person or a freelance person knows that struggle, but of course there are other benefits as well. But yeah, when I was taking the dive, it was something that I struggled with emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. And especially when parents kind of get into that position where I'm very similar. My parents come from the self-employed world. My dad is a business owner, but my mom really wanted me to like, that's what all parents want. They want you to have a good job. They want you to, if you're making the decision of working for this job that provides you with a really good salary, it gives them some peace of mind that like, oh, you're taken care of, you can take care of yourself. You got it all together. And then when you decide to make this drastic leap, it's like they have to, or you have to, I don't know if you necessarily have to convince them that like, it's going to be okay, but they have to wrap their mind around that too. And it's hard, especially if they don't understand what it is you'll be doing, what your plan is. But I think there's always, that part that's like, well, at least I'm happy and fulfilled in the work that I do. And the lack of the regular paycheck and benefits, that's the price I pay for being able to, work and set my own schedule and travel whenever I want and just make all these other decisions that I never even which is kind of ridiculous, like thought I would ever be able to make again, because I remember sitting in my cubicle thinking like, do I have to ask for permission to do everything for the rest of my life now? And yeah, that's the price you pay.
It totally is. Yeah. And that the conversation with my family was definitely so hard. My dad in particular. I think that there's an element of like, yes, he wants me to be able to take care of myself, which is important. But I think that maybe he also thought he'd have to come bail me out of Brazilian jail at some point.
That's amazing.
It wasn't maybe that far from the truth, but yeah, I totally get it. So, but yeah, so those were definitely the hard conversations. That was the difficult part.
Yeah, and I just have one last question as it pertains to your story, and it's about sustainability. And like, you did an amazing thing, and there's a lot of people who do this. Not really. But I mean, in regards to something like this, they challenge themselves to go after this goal, and they figure out what sacrifices they need to make, and whether it's paying off like a huge amount of debt, which I think is really common in the personal finance blogger world, where they like cut back, pay off a bunch of debt in a really short amount of time, and then kind of move on with their life. You saved a bunch of money. And this is kind of the goal setting method, is like figure out what you need to do, get after it and do it. But how do you kind of take this story and go, okay, this is what you can take from this story to apply to the rest of your life, not just like one specific go on a no spend, challenge or whatever. Because I find that it's hard for people to, I don't know, figure or realize that like these no spend challenges aren't sustainable for forever, but how can you use this to help you move ahead and make better financial decisions?
Totally. And I think that when it comes to saving money, there's a couple different methodologies. There's many different methodologies, to be totally honest. And just one of them is doing these like no spend periods, or I call it like a period of like dumpster dogging. Mm-hmm. And, for some people, like for me, it works really well, because I feel like I just am very naturally not good at moderation. Like moderation is not my strong suit. Like I'm like either super hot or super cold. Like that's just kind of my natural state of being. And so for me, it works really well to be like, you know what, this week, every single morning when I wake up, the answer is going to be no. Like the answer is no. There is like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just going to be no. But I also realize that I'm not everybody, and that some other people just work better at utilizing moderation, right? Just tracking what they're spending and not going over budget in certain categories. And so it kind of just takes fudging around with both to figure out which one works better for you, or which combination of the two work better for you. So like what I like to do now is, for instance, I'll have like 2 weeks every quarter where I don't spend any money, or I'll pick like 2 weeks every couple months where I don't spend any money, or I try not to. Like I'm also like not gonna like hold back if there's something I really want to do, but it's just the idea of like nothing's flowing through that Amazon cart. I'm not stepping into any stores and making any impulse purchases. And I think you're just end up being surprised about not only like what you'll spend, but like, or what you won't spend, but also like how easy it is to entertain yourself without spending money once you get the hang of it. At first, it's very difficult, but now what I realize is that my favorite hobbies are all free, like walking around the city, reading books, like catching up with people. These are all the things that I really like to do. And I make so much more time for them when I'm going through these periods of dumpster dogging. Again, that's not to say that it's necessarily for everyone. It might not be sustainable. Like, for instance, one way in which I feel like it's really difficult to navigate is like, I am single and like I should probably be putting a lot more effort into dating, but I don't because I hate it. But like, if the opportunity arises, basically it would have to land on my lap. Like, I shouldn't say no to that, right? And like, you're not going to like meet your long-term lover during a no spend period. But I just think that like, you just have to kind of figure out what works for you and your style.
Yeah, exactly. I resonate with that so much because there's definitely people who can do moderation in this world, but it's only a small piece of the pie. Like, there's also a lot of people who really struggle with that. And personally for me, I've seen some people close to me who like, and I always kind of compare finance to fitness and health because I'm a douchebag, but the like whole diet lifestyle and going on like really strict diets and not, I would say it's not as healthy probably for people when it comes to their health, but like you can do that with finances if it's going to work for you. Because moderation is really hard to achieve. I mean, we see it all the time. People fail at dieting all the time because, or dieting appropriately because, and that's why we live in a world that's so unhealthy because it's really hard to live in moderation when it comes to any type of consumption. And so, yeah, like figure out what works for you and then go with that. And I love those hard and fast rules of like the answer is no. That's something that I feel like I live by for certain things that I typically, sometimes spend money on. I'm kind of in the same vein. Like shopping for me is just like, usually for me, the answer is no, unless I am going through a period of like wanting to buy a bunch of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I think that comparing it to eating and exercise, there's a reason that everybody does it and draws these parallels is because they're so incredibly similar. And I think in one of my articles about dumpster dogging, I compare it specifically to like, it's like a crash diet. It's like, okay, so like tell yourself you can eat French fries one day and tell yourself then like you have to go on a juice diet the next day. Like, I don't necessarily condone that for your actual eating habits,
right.
But with your finances, we're not at like the risk of colon cancer. It's like there's really only upside. And like I've had some pushback being like, well, like what if you just go nuts at the end of a dumpster dogging period? And it's like, okay, like I don't know. We're all adults here, and I trust that people like aren't gonna like go like buck wild just because they couldn't spend money for a week. Maybe it's possible that you do, but I trust us. We're all adults here.
Yeah, I think like you can buy It's more like don't buy a bunch of crap you probably don't need. And then over the weekend, if you're off your dumpster dog period, like buy the 1 to 2 things that you were really having your eye on or that you were really missed during that period. But it's not, go out and just like rage.
Right. And I think that it's as much about separating yourself from all of the millions and millions of temptations to spend that exist out there in the world. Like, I think that the statistic is that we encounter like 5,000 ads a day, which is so insane. And it's not just ads. A lot of us, for instance, live in cities where we're walking past storefronts and we're walking past coffee shops or a corner market where we can grab a kombucha or whatever it is. And all of these things add up like crazy, right? And so it's nice to have those black and white boundaries where you can just say, okay, well, today is not a day where I'm going to do any of that. And so for me, that's why it works so well.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, we need to move on because otherwise we're going to be here forever and we have so much still to cover. But thank you so much, Amanda. I love hearing your story. I love hearing the very just like clear and concise, like, okay, you know what? If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't, but here are some alternatives or here's how you can approach it. Now I want to get into our tangible tips round, which really focus on the big topic of the week. And I love your company's name, Invested Development. I think that's amazing. I wish I would have thought of it myself. A little jealous. But I'm just asking you to share your biggest tangible investing tips that you have, especially for someone who's kind of on the edge and is a little weary about investing because they just don't quite know yet if they can do it, if they can handle it.
Sure. So, I will take a step back and just let people know that my major focus is the stock market. That's my area of expertise. And that's not to say that there aren't multiple types of investing that can be very lucrative and that are great to educate yourself about. So for instance, rental properties would be another topic to dive in on. But I primarily focus on long-term investing within your 401k or other retirement plan. And usually that means looking at the stock market. But so you asked me to put together a couple of tips. And so I put together 4 tips. And what I'm never very good at is just being okay, you should go do X, Y, Z, because really what I want people to understand is why you're doing X, Y, and Z. And so that's why I kind of hate, if you turn on Good Morning America and they're giving you one quick 30-second tip on how to be invested. I'm no, but you should understand that investment if you're going to invest in it. And so a lot of what I'm going to say is going to have a little bit more background. And so I feel it's never what anybody wants, on a quick and dirty podcast, but here we go. So I would say first and foremost, understand what a stock and a bond are. There are a couple things that I hear said wrong all of the time. And one of those is let's say I ask somebody oh, how are you invested? What they would say is I'm invested in my 401k. And to which I would say a 401k is an account. What are the investments being held within that 401k? And maybe they would say, oh, mutual funds. And I'm okay, well, a mutual fund is an investment vehicle, but what does that mutual fund hold? So let's back up. So first of all, a 401k is not an investment, right? A 401k is just an account. It is the garage where you park the car, and then the car is the thing that drives your returns, right? So that's your investment. Now, separate, a mutual fund is an investment vehicle, right? It is an investment, but it's what is inside the mutual fund that really, really counts. So if you own a mutual fund that holds stocks, then you own stocks. If you own a mutual fund that holds bonds, then you hold bonds. And I always like to use this comparison. Let's see if I can do this one right. So think of a mutual fund as a suitcase that you're packing and taking on a trip. You're packing a bunch of shit together to take on your journey. That's essentially what a mutual fund is. Mutual fund's a big old basket of stuff. It's a big old suitcase of stuff. And it's what's on the inside that counts. So are you packing chains and whips and a warlock costume? Or are you packing a turtleneck and a pencil skirt, right? What is packed within the suitcase or within those funds will determine your investment journey and experience. And so circling back to my first point, that is why you need to know above all else what is a stock and what is a bond. Because most likely when you're looking at those options within your 401k account of which mutual fund to choose, you're choosing between a stock fund, a bond fund, or some combination fund. And so understanding what a stock and a bond are of utmost importance. Which, Tess, tell me, do you want to go over what a stock and a bond is, or should we give that to people as homework and move on?
I think we can give it to people as homework, but I would just like to go on your suitcase analogy and say, I feel like a stock would be more like the whips and chains and warlock costume, and maybe the bonds are more of the pencil skirts and turtlenecks.
You're right. I should have clarified that. I'm glad you did.
All right, we can move on.
And by the way, warlock costume was not part of the original joke. That one just came out of my mouth.
I love it.
Yeah, don't check my Amazon shopping cart.
Okay, this is just a side note. If you guys are listening and you're on a computer, not driving right now, you should definitely go to dumpsterdogblog.com because Amanda has the most amazing, or just check out her Instagram because the costumes are just out of this world. I'm so impressed by your costume. I don't want to even see your closet. Do you keep all those costumes?
So most of the aggressive costuming was done like before I started being good with my money. And so that was like pre-trip. And so I don't own a lot of them anymore, but like I'll still get it together every now and then. Like the big recent one was I don't know if you ever watched it, but I did like a Save Now, Party Later, Golden Girls Gone Wild music video. And so it was just all grannies all the time, badass grannies. And so that was like my most recent foray back into the costuming game. But
you have a lot of gray wigs in your closet.
I have like so many gray wigs, and they come in very handy. I actually just wore one the other day.
That's amazing. All right, let's go on. Tip number 2. What do you got?
Okay. So I would say after learning about stocks and bonds, the next step is to assess your goals over a timeline to determine whether you should own stocks or bonds or cash or real estate or both or whatever it may be. But I think that a lot of people skip this step of assessing your goals and assessing your time frame, because that's actually the first step in understanding how you should be invested. I think a lot of us, when we think about investing, we think about like flipping on the TV to like CNN Money or Squawk Box or some of that other like bullshit minute-to-minute financial news programming. And what we think is like the most important decision is, should we be invested in Microsoft stock? Should we be in Tesla stock? Should we be in Apple stock? Whatever it is. But that's actually like a very micro decision. First, what we need to do is assess, should you be invested in the stock market at all? And so we do that by looking at our goals over our time frame. And so ask yourself, okay, what is my goal with the money? And then when do I need the money? So what is my goal with the money and when do I need the money? And then determine which of these asset classes makes the most sense, or investment types. I don't mean to use jargon when I say asset classes. Investment types makes the most sense. And so let me give you an example. So think about first a short-term money goal. And I think short-term is a lot easier than long-term. It's more intuitive. So let's say you had a short-term money goal, like you wanted to save up for a down payment that you wanted to put down in 6 months or a year or even 2 years, right? Your goal for that money is to be able to afford to buy a down payment, right? Now, what is the biggest risk you can take with that money? Well, the biggest risk you could take is losing any of that money, right? Because we know that the stock market is so volatile. This is a trademark of the stock market. You probably wouldn't want to put money for the short term in the stock market if you knew you had a goal of 1 year or 2 years into the future, right? And so in assessing that reward risk trade-off and looking at your goals and time frame, you can understand that. Now let's think about over the long term. What is your goal for your long-term money? So presumably your retirement money, right? Well, the goal is to live off of that money in retirement, right? That's why you're doing it. And so that means that your goal right now for the money, presumably, like this is assuming you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, even early 50s, is you would like to grow that money as much as reasonably possible by investing without taking any like totally exorbitant risks. Okay, so then what is the biggest risk you have with long-term money? Well, the biggest risk you have is actually the most counterintuitive part, but the biggest risk you have is actually running out of money in retirement, not having enough. And so in knowing that our goal is to grow the money as much as possible right now while we can, so we can spend it in retirement and avoid the risk of running out of money in retirement, we can kind of come full circle back to understanding that for most young people, and this isn't everybody, but for most young people, they should be invested in a portfolio that's heavily allocated to the stock market or to stocks. What I don't recommend for most people is picking your own stocks. We do have mutual funds, which make it very, very easy to invest in the stock market, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But we're just thinking about stocks as an asset class in general. And so now exactly how much you have in your portfolio is determined by your comfort and investing in the stock market. For instance, I'm extremely comfortable investing in the stock market. I feel like I really understand it, and I would also not fuck it up in a time where the stocks are down or stock market is down. If you do not have that type of confidence, then you should have a little bit less, whether that's having 60%, 70%, or 80% of your portfolio in stocks, and then the rest in bonds or maybe even cash. And so taking some time to think about your goals for any set of money. It doesn't even have to be your retirement money, right? I often have people come to me and say, I have $50,000. What should I do to invest? That doesn't happen all the time, but it happens every now and then. What should I do to invest it? And my first question is, okay, well, what's your goal for it? Like, I can't tell you how to invest it if you can't tell me what your goal is and when you want to use that money.
Amazing. You just did so much for Podcasts Everywhere, which is explaining the investment timeline and risk and reward analysis via only your voice. I would be throwing my hands up everywhere. Are you a little sweaty right now?
I'm so sweaty. I mean, it's 100 degrees where I am right now. I'm actually sitting on my bed in my bedroom, and it's 100 degrees. No, but that's okay. This is what I do. I actually don't feel like I actually mentioned what invested development is, which is my business, which for the most part, I write, I do my blog, I do freelance writing, but for the most part, what I do is in-person workshops. And so this is old hat for old dumpster doggy.
That's amazing. All right. What is your next tip? Let's keep it going.
Sure. Okay. So let's say you've decided on investing in stocks. A super easy way to invest in the stock market is using what are called index funds. And you can do this at any of the low-cost brokerage firms. Some of my personal favorites are Vanguard, Fidelity, and Charles Schwab. A low-cost brokerage firm essentially means first of all, a brokerage firm is like a bank, but for the fancy stuff. So like stocks, bonds, funds, whatever. Low-cost brokerage firms won't charge you minimum account dues, and they shouldn't charge you to buy and sell certain funds or buy and sell certain stocks. And so Vanguard, Fidelity, and Charles Schwab are really great about that. Just to give you some reference, a full service brokerage firm would be like your Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. And so those generally require a higher account minimum. They also charge you a lot more for services. They're also going to try to sell you wealth advisory services, which for most people just getting started out, they don't need that. They just need to open an account, have an account where they're siphoning money in on a regular basis and getting it invested in funds. And again, index funds are a really great way to do that. We can get into index funds in a second, but just so people know, at Fidelity and Charles Schwab, I believe that you can start with as little as $100. At Vanguard, it takes $1,000 to get started. And so either save up $1,000 and do Vanguard or get started right away at Fidelity. Fidelity just actually lowered their rates on all their funds. And so they're, I think, now the most competitive in the industry. And so any of those options is really good. Now, some of you may have a 401k already provided to you through work. If you are active with that employer, you can't change that. And so just use that. I'm a total believer in using whatever is directly in front of you. There's always some way to game the taxes. You can read a million articles on whether you should do a Roth IRA or a regular IRA or 401k or blah, blah, blah. I say use what's in front of you because saving works best when it's easiest. Also, of course, if you have a 401k, you may have a match, and you should always take advantage of the match. If you don't have an account, a Roth IRA is a great option for a lot of people. If you are single and you earn less than that, then I think it's $119,000 a year. Or if you're married, filing jointly, I believe it's $189,000 a year. If you earn less than that, then you can use a Roth IRA. Now, so now circling back to index funds. So Tess, tell me this, should we get into index funds or is this more homework for people?
I think we can get in lightly, some light petting on the index funds so that people have an idea of their picture, what they're looking at right now.
Sure, we can do this super easy. So basically, when it comes to mutual funds, not all mutual funds are created equal. Surprise, surprise. So there's really two different kinds, two different types. The first of those is passive, and the second is managed. So passive means essentially there is no manager making a decision about what goes in and out of the mutual fund. Historically, all mutual funds were managed. Every single one of them had a manager, and it was somebody that was saying, okay, everybody, let's pool our money together. I'll take the money, I'll go out and I'll buy the stocks, and I'll say, I like this stock, I don't like this stock. I'm buying this stock, I'm selling this stock. And so he's not only actively managing what ends up in the mutual fund, whether you see it or not, right? You're not seeing the inner workings of the fund. You're just seeing it sitting there within your account, just this one line item. It's just a fund, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And he's going to charge a management fee for that. And so also historically, managed mutual funds would be charging 1%, 2%, 3% for these services, which what we're now learning is that this has been one of the biggest scams in all of the financial services industry. People probably lost more money to manage mutual funds than, I don't know, any other financial scam. Don't quote me on that, but it's been pretty wild. And the reason for that is active money management is really difficult, and very few people, if anyone, can beat the stock market's performance over time. And the only reason you would actively manage any stock portfolio is if you thought you could beat the stock market's average. Because if you just want to return the stock market average, you invest in a passive or an index fund where there is no manager and you are basically just owning the whole stock market. And there are multiple ways to do this. You can do that by just owning the U.S. stock market or owning a representative portion of the U.S. stock market. Or you could do all global stocks, or you could do one U.S. stock fund and one foreign fund. There's a couple ways to do it, but point is, with one click of a button, no manager, you can own pretty much every U.S. stock that there is. And it costs almost next to nothing. And so again, what we've learned now from about 40 years of being able to compare the data is almost always, I believe that last year the data showed us that 99% of active money managers that manage mutual funds did worse than the average, which is like pretty crazy if you think about it. These people are like absolutely terrible at their jobs, which understanding why is like kind of a topic for another day. But that's why we say like, hey, if you want to outperform the majority of investors out there in the world who are doing their own active management, whether through a mutual fund or by picking their own stocks directly, if you want to do better than all those people, just own the market, call it a day, and let it ride. And so that's again called a passive fund. You will more than likely see it called an index fund. An index is essentially one of the established measures of a specific market. So, for instance, the S&P 500 index is just an index that measures the market, and it measures the 500 leading companies in the United States. Nowadays, you can buy an S&P 500 index fund. So basically, this fund mimics this index that is just designed to essentially like measure how stocks are doing over time. And so that's why it's called an index fund, because it's mimicking an index that is simply measuring the broad marketplace. Does that make sense? I know I kind of got into some terminology there.
It's good. It's good. If you need to, you can pause it, replay it, re-listen to it, because it's really important. And I think, that's a really comprehensive explanation of index funds, and that will help us, especially as we go into the next point, which I have a little inkling of what it is, but understanding that like you can own a huge swath of the market, whether it's the U.S. market or the global market, just by investing in a U.S. index fund or the U.S. stock market or the global market. And that's really important, especially when people are thinking like, oh my gosh, doomsday is coming. We have to run for the hills. All my money is in the stock market. What do I do? So let's get to that next point.
Yes. And so, okay. So my fourth point for us today is in the event the stock market is tanking, which just so you know, like a bad market, we call it a bear market. A bad market happens about once a decade. It is impossible to predict exactly when it will come. Sometimes it comes every 5 years. Sometimes it will take longer. It's impossible to know, but it is normal and natural when it happens. The stock market is not always going to be going up. There are going to be times when stocks in general, the entire stock market is down. In fact, in 2008, the U.S. stock market was down over 50%. So that means if you were owning just one of those whole market index funds and you popped open your portfolio, let's say you were 100% invested in stocks, which, I probably wouldn't recommend for a first timer. But if you pop open your account and you look at your account, you would have had 50% less money than you had 3, 4, 5, 6 months prior. And that will fuck with your head. Let me tell you, like I had grown men that were like throwing themselves out a window, begging me to bail out of stocks at the bottom, like when they're down 50%. My entire job in 2008 and then in 2009 and 2010 was basically begging men to be like, these grown men to be like, no, do not sell. It will come around. It always does. And so my fourth point is, do not sell your stocks when the market is tanking. If you think that there's even an inclination that you might do that, you really have to probably not invest at all, to be totally honest. If you are investing in the stock market for the first time, I think it is imperative that you have an understanding of volatility and of market cycles. I don't think that you should even be allowed to invest in the stock market. Well, that's not true. Go do whatever you want. Sometimes making some early mistakes teaches you a lot. I think a lot of people probably won't learn this lesson until they go through it themselves. But I think that it's really important to have an understanding of why stocks do that. Why volatility? Like what causes the volatility? What would cause the stock market to go down 50% in one single year? And so, at this point, what I would have you do is I would have you look at a visual of the stock market's growth over time. And so just bear with me as I describe this. But essentially, a stock's growth over time is it's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. But then over longer periods of time, you realize that up, down, up, down, up, down actually does stretch up and move higher over time. Let me give you like a numerical example of this. So we say that stocks return about 10% a year, but never is there like a year where you actually see that's not true. Maybe every now and then you see a year that stocks are up perfectly 10%, but it's much more likely that you would see stocks up 30% one year, up 2% the next year, and then down 30% the next year. And then over time, that averages out to about 10% a year. Tess, at this point, what I would generally do is make a comparison to my dating life. What I would say is it's kind of like me hooking up with dudes. Like some years I hook up with 20 dudes. Some years I hook up with 2 dudes. Some years I hook up with negative dudes. But over time, on average, every year I average out about 10 dudes per year, right? It is purely an average. But really what you get is this crazy volatility in the short term that it can actually sometimes feel like you're treading water, because it really takes the stock market 30, 40, even 50 years to provide the results that you need. And so try to envision those trends up, down, but moves higher over the time. And so, okay, so we get this. So to be a good investor, you have to know what causes this. What causes this up, down, but moves higher over time. So again, if you were to flip on Fox Money or any of those shows, what they would have you believe is that it's the following types of things that are moving stock prices. For one, there's growth in the economy. People are spending more money on cans of Coca-Cola and Louis Vuitton purses and other shit that they don't need, so stocks are up. Or there's a tsunami in Japan, or Mars is parallel to Saturn and it's a Wednesday, and that causes stock prices to go
lower. Mercury is
in
retrograde.
Right? They will come up with anything to make some unilateral like description of like why stocks are doing what it is that they do. But the reality is none of these things cause some unilateral or predictable move in the stock market. And that's because there's really only two forces that can move anything in an open market, including the stock market. Because if you think about it, well, actually, I'll say what the answer is first. And those two things are supply and demand, right? Supply and demand. And the stock market is a marketplace like any other market. It just so happens to be that what is for sale are these teeny tiny little parcels of company ownership, right? That's what you own when you own a stock. Like you own a teeny tiny little sliver of Twitter or of Facebook or of, Exxon or whatever it is. Like you own a percentage ownership in a company. But just like anything else for sale in the market, it is supply and demand for a stock that determines its price. And so specifically, when you are seeing a stock move up and down in the short term, it is most likely because demand for that stock is shifting. A lot of that is because like the big old supply of stocks stays largely the same or changes very slowly over time. And so really focus like on the idea that demand or our desire to own any single given stock at any one time actually gives it its value. It gives it its price. Which at this point I do have another dating example I can give to you, but I know I don't want to like waste our time.
You can't tease us with a dating example. You have to share it now.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this one. Okay, so imagine like that hot football player from high school that everybody wanted to date. Like he was in very high demand in high school. So therefore the cost of dating him was very high. Like you had to be pretty. Like you couldn't have like frizzy hair. You had to like shave your cooter, like whatever it is. But 10 years later, the allure for him has worn off now that he's dropped out of the local JC out of a football career-ending ACL injury. He gained a little weight around the midsection. He's now a career mattress salesman. So now demand to date him is low, and therefore the cost of dating him is low. Anybody could hit that, right?
Right.
And so it's the same thing with stocks. How much we desire them at a given moment has a direct impact on their price or their value. And so like all those things that I mentioned earlier, like whatever, Saturn aligning with Jupiter or a big world event or political news, like if you're feeling cranky one day, like all of these things impact how much a stock, a single stock or stocks in general are being demanded. No one of these things changes the price of a stock in and of itself. It all kind of factors into it. It all affects the way that we feel about stocks, along with like a million bazillion other factors. And the buying and selling we do reflects that feeling, right? And that is what changes a stock's price. This was like a really long way to basically say like, we're the ones causing the volatility, right? We're the ones causing this up and down motion, especially in the short term. And a huge part of what is baked into the price of every stock is not only like what investors think a company is worth, but it's also our future expectations on each individual company or the whole market in general. So you you would never go and buy a stock if you didn't think that it would make you money in the future. That's the whole point of investing. That's the whole point of owning a stock. And that's what this rattling around in the market is it's investors buying and selling and trying to position themselves best for the future. But the thing is, no one knows what will happen in the future, right? There is no one right price of a stock. Anybody that tells you they know exactly what a stock should be valued at is also a liar, because nobody can know what will happen in the future. So therefore, nobody knows what the right price of a stock is. But that's what buyers and sellers are trying to consistently find out, and that's what causes volatility. And this volatility can happen on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, and on a year-to-year basis. People think a year is a long time for us. A year is not a long time in the stock market at all. And so because of all of this, because nobody can tell what the future is going to be, which stocks are going to be best, how the stock market is going to perform, we know that demand is wacky and unpredictable. right? It's completely impossible to know what the global collective of stock buyers and sellers are going to want on any one given day or month or even year. And I just like drive this point home, like probably too hard, because I think to be a good stock investor, you have to shrug off the volatility. And I think it helps to know why the volatility is happening, right? If something ever spooks you in the market, if you're like, holy shit, I can't believe stocks are down, just remember that yes, demand is like wacky and crazy and unpredictable. And that's because humans are wacky and crazy and unpredictable. And sometimes the things that we like demand are wacky and crazy and predictable. It's not always totally rational. And so you just have to shrug off the fact that we are overreactors by nature. We're overreactors on to the good side, right? People get like way too jazzed about stocks sometimes, and then they also get way too dour about stocks sometimes. But like this really amazing thing happens over the long term, right? All of these inputs act like this kind of incredible voting mechanism that when stretched out over long periods of time is actually incredibly accurate at reflecting at how much growth actually takes place in the in a company, because like the stock returns are, if you think about it, they're kind of detached from what a company actually does. Like a company could have a really great year revenue wise, but the stock doesn't perform well because maybe like the CEO got caught in like I don't know, some like puppy beating scandal or whatever it is, and so people punish the stock of that company. And so point is, stock market doesn't always match up exactly with how companies the amount of money that companies earn over time, but over long periods, it does a really good job. And to be a good stock investor, I think you just have to believe that companies are going to find ways to get richer over time, like one way or another, which you know those bastards are for better or worse, and trust that the stock market is also going to move higher. So that was a very long explanation for you, Tess.
I love it. And I think that like everyone could benefit from, if something didn't make sense for you or if you got lost somewhere, like that's normal. Go back and listen to this because it is a really good explanation and can help people understand that like a lot of investing is really understanding what's happening, not necessarily needing to know like, oh, what's going to be the good stock to invest in, or what's going to, what do I think is going to happen? Like we need to stop trying to think that we can predict the future and know that we can't, none of us can handle anyone else's emotions. But what you can do is just like sit back on your haunches and go, okay, when everyone's freaking out, I'm going to be okay with this because I understand what's going on. So re-listening to that segment especially is going to be really helpful. The thoughts that I have so many thoughts after that of just like reiterating or just making comparisons. I think the big thing is like, I loved your dating example with the football player that has like his stock is high because everyone is, after him at that certain period of time. And all of a sudden, if something randomly changes, let's say, I don't know if I can expand on this analogy, but like, when stocks are tanking, so to speak, on this football player, like if right now he still holds his value because you're still in high school, it's just like that's the time to get excited that he's going on sale. Maybe he's going through a bad breakup, so he's a little more vulnerable. Just get after it.
Totally. No, I like that. I like that you I like that you built off of that analogy. I think probably like the best analogy for people to wrap their heads around is thinking about the value of their home, right? Thinking about the price of real estate. So like, let's say there's a real estate bubble and your house that is currently valued at $500,000 is now worth $300,000. Like, are you going to freak out and try to sell your house in that exact moment? No, you're going to sit back and you're going to chill out and you're going to like wait a couple years to see what happens. But people just aren't very good at that with the stock market because we don't feel the tangible value of stocks. Like, right, nothing about what we own has changed other than that the value in that minute. But like the percentage ownership we own in that company is still the exact same. Just like your home is still the same, but it's, providing you a warm place to sleep at night. And so we understand that better. But it's that same idea. But like, okay, so think about it now from a buyer's perspective and a real estate bubble occurs. Like, would you want to go out and buy a house at that time? Hell yeah, that would be a great time to go buy a house, and would also be a great time to invest in the stock market, right? And that's like that whole adage. That's like the oldest adage in the book. I believe it's a Warren Buffett, which is be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And it's so right and it's so true, but it's really hard for investors to wrap their mind around, because the reality is we are causing the stock market panic. Our selling is causing stocks to take a big dip. We are quite literally causing it. So that means that there's probably some coinciding panic, right? So like in 2008, it was like this house of cards that began with these like crazy credit default swaps and mortgage-backed securities, which we don't need to get into that. Basically, there was a credit crunch and people freaked out, thought it was going to be like the end of banks as we knew it, and started bailing out of their stocks. And them selling their stocks is what caused the stock market to drop. But nothing about Coca-Cola as a company there's nothing broken about that company. Those motherfuckers are going to find a way to sell more cans of cola across the globe. And in fact, it's actually a great time to buy into the market, but it's very hard to do because everyone around you is going to be in a panic. And if everybody around you is in a panic, your cave woman brain is not going to be telling you like, oh, we should just get in there. Your cave woman brain is going to have a biological response to this panic, and you're going to want to protect yourself from like what you believe to be like a dangerous environment. And so it's difficult, but you really have to train your brain to think opposite, or even better, just don't get flustered by anything. Don't get flustered by the upside. Don't get flustered by the downside. Just keep adding money in every month. But maybe that's through your 401k or through your Roth IRA or whatever it is. Just add a little bit in each month, and don't let any market condition change whether you're adding money in.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, a lot of people can go, okay, when the stock market is down, okay, I just need to remain calm. I need to potentially buy because Amanda said, now stocks are on sale. People are fearful. I need to be greedy. Okay, what do I buy? And that goes back to then point number 3, where you don't have to choose like, oh, which individual stock isn't in the shitter. Maybe banks were sucking, but Coca-Cola was just fine. They're still keeping their lights on. They're going to continue to figure out how to make money. But that's where people get caught up again, is they forget their like basics and forget that, oh, I just need to buy into the market as a whole via index funds. And then, yeah, maybe those index funds own a little bit of the banks that are sucking right now, but they also might own some other things that then by investing in the index fund, I know that the entire market is on sale at this point. So I can invest here, and if I can get them on sale, then it'll inch up as time goes on, because people are going to figure out how to rebound. And especially like the 500 leading companies in the U.S. stock market are going to figure out how to rebound and get back to normal levels. And that's also based on people's own feelings. Oh, it's such a like dog eating its tail.
Yeah, well, no, it really is, because I mean, that's kind of what happens is, it's like people just get tired of being super sour on the market. And some people, when people kind of, maybe the market's been down for 3 months or 6 months or a year, and you're kind of realizing, okay, like, yeah, the world's not falling apart around me. These stocks maybe are actually kind of a good deal right now. So slowly but surely, people start buying back into the stock market, and then you start to see the stock market turn around like crazy. Like I think so. The low in 2009 was, I know it was in March 9th, 2009 was the low. And I want to say that 2009 ended up being, after being down 50% from top to bottom, I want to say 2009 turned around and was up 30% or something crazy, which is a really good year in the stock market. And every year since then, maybe we've had a flat year or two, but every year since then has been positive. But so many people have missed out on that ensuing upside because they like want to wait until everything feels better. Well, like, okay, it's 2018 right now. It's 10 years into this bull market cycle or this good market cycle. Like, if you wait till everything feels better, you're going to be waiting forever. You know what I mean? You got to be able to like get in there when things start rising. Or again, I don't really recommend timing anything, but like this idea that things will turn around. You'll hear a lot of similar things every time there's a stock market crash, and one of those things is this time is different. This time it's different, and this is going to be the time that stocks go to zero, that stocks lose all of their value. That is something that is said every single stock market crash, and it's not ever happened as far as like the whole stock market. Of course, there are individual stocks that go to zero. Like for instance, in the tech bubble, like there are tons of stocks that went to zero. But like a lot of the tried and true companies, they're not going to zero. And so
and that's why you have to be invested in the index and not in these individual stocks.
Exactly. Choosing stocks is risky. Building a portfolio of individual stocks takes a ton of work. In fact, to be properly diversified, which is this idea you were alluding to earlier, which is that, you know, by owning the index, you'll own a whole bunch of different companies, not just the ones that might not be doing well, but like all of them, the ones that are doing well, the ones that aren't, but also ones across every single sector. There's 11 different sectors, which a sector is essentially an industry. If you own a global index fund, you won't be in just the U.S. You'll be in other developed nations as well. So you'll be in whatever, Canada, Australia, Japan, European nations, and so on. And so you get this diversification. So you're not loaded up all in one area. If you were to be building a portfolio of only stocks for yourselves, you would probably want to invest in 40, 50 stocks at least. So no one stock takes up more than maybe like 1% or 2% of your overall portfolio. Now, what I will say is that like a lot of times people say, well, okay, but there is this one company I like, or this like handful of companies that I really like. And if you want to invest directly in some companies, I say go for it. I think that like it's fine when you're young to take a little bit of risk, but maybe don't do it with more than 5% of your portfolio. I think that would be like a good rule of thumb is sure, get out there and test it out, buy some individual stocks. But like for the most part, engage in this super easy, super cost efficient, diversified strategy that is buying an index fund.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I even do that. I think for me, the individual stocks that I own are just like things that I'm like, oh, this would be interesting, or this is an experiment, but it's with money that I'm willing to lose. And that's like, you know, as you said, it wouldn't be more than 5% of your portfolio, because like you could probably stomach a 5% loss, or a loss of 5% of your portfolio. As you get more money, maybe not, but at this point, you know, you probably could stomach that. And so I kind of think of it as like, these are just things that I like buy, you know, they're like my designer handbags, but because I just don't like to buy designer handbags, but I like to buy stocks. But they're not part of my long-term game plan, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Well, and then the good thing about stocks that doesn't happen with designer handbags is they earn compound returns, which is a whole nother, I won't get into it because I know my expectations have been so long.
No, that's amazing. I have two last thoughts on this. And yeah, I think that when everyone is kind of running for the hills, the best thing to do is remember, like, you know, remember this episode, remember the basics and the fundamentals, and just like keep you cool. And consider that an opportunity for you instead of a place where you need to run. And then the last thing I was going to say is that it's so sad, but like, people are probably like, why don't they talk about this on TV? Why don't they, you know, why isn't this on Fox Money? Why do I have to listen to all this chatter about individual stocks? And it's because telling like people to keep calm and like don't sell shit is boring for TV. And that sucks for us, for people who are generally media consumers, to not be able to have that education at their disposal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so getting your financial education from any news source is generally not recommended, right? Because there has to be a story there. And the reality of financial education is that it's like pretty straightforward and it's pretty boring. And there's only so many ways you can say, just consistently invest in the market. Don't get upset when it goes down and wait for 40 years. The end.
Right. I think you could totally have a TV show, and I'm going to put that in your brain so that you become the next like money news person who entertains people while saying the same thing over and over again.
Oh, yeah. Next Susie Orman, like maybe minus like the bad spray tan. That was rude. I love Susie. Queen Susie. Oh,
Hey, nothing wrong with a bad spray tan. They're still bad, though.
I got it.
Okay, we will move on. Although I could talk about investing all day, especially when it comes to like helping other people kind of overcome their fear of getting in the stock market. It's still a very like great place to get into, especially when bad things are happening. Like, get in then, go for it. But I think, the one thing that I was going to say is like, I don't think you should never sell out of the market because of what the market is doing. Like, maybe buy into it because of what it's doing. If you feel it's necessary, like just buy in, just put your money in there. But selling is the right time to sell should only ever be based on your own personal situation of like, okay, now I'm retiring, so I need to start, rebalancing this so it's appropriate for my risk. And then like, obviously you're going to have to sell in order to get your money out. But that will come with like the appropriate time and risk rebalancing and the whole timeline situation, as opposed to like, oh shit, the market's, in the shitter, sell now.
Couldn't agree more.
So that's just a good little piece for people to remember. Okay, I do want to ask you this question, even though we need to get into the quick and dirty round, but I love this question. And that is, what is one piece of money advice that you just doesn't work for you? And what do you do instead?
Ooh, I think that I kind of alluded to this earlier, but like, I am not naturally a great budgeter. I still try to track my spending because it's important and it's also what I do. And so I do it. But what I don't necessarily love is setting like budgetary categories for myself. So for instance, like saying like,
sorry, you're speaking my language. Okay, keep going.
I'm like that. So like, for instance, like I'm not somebody that's like, okay, I'm going to spend $200 every month on X and $100 every month on Y, because I don't know, my life is just like a little bit more dynamic than that at this point. And I think maybe that changes when you have a family and you don't, we both travel a lot and things come up, and I try to just be a little bit more flexible about that. And so the way I do that is by kind of just more tracking on like a week by week basis and being able to rein it in particular categories if I need to, but without setting like necessarily like boundaries. I know that like a lot of diehard Mint users out there would disagree with me, but that's kind of just not my style.
I just can't really, when it comes to Mint, I'm like, I remember using it even when I wasn't, teaching other people personal finance, and I was making a good income, and I was like, I'm investing, I'm doing all these things right. And Mint was still telling me like, you're a shithead because you overspent $20 in your coffee budget. And I'm like, damn it, Mint, I like coffee. Get off my ass.
And it's just like so hard to know. Like, I mean, our lives are so different week to week and month to month. And I think that we're really lucky, right? We're really lucky to have this type of flexibility in our lives and so much opportunity to go out and have fun and meet with people and meet with friends and whatever it is. And so like, instead it just works so much better for me to kind of track it on like a more like an individual spending item basis, as opposed to trying to limit myself to categories. That said, I do think that tracking is important, and I have a pretty good grasp of how much money is going in and out like at any given moment during the month. And so it's not that I'm being flippant about it, it's just that like I don't create a lot of rules about it.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I think that especially if you have more rules around what you actually spend your money on, it's a lot easier to track your spending, because you just don't spend, like for me, I'm like, I just don't really go shopping. So I don't need to track as many things, because really the only places I spend money on are coffee and I don't know, coffee.
Travel, maybe?
Travel, yeah. Coffee and travel. Yes, categorical spending. I feel like budgeting in categories was developed for people who do have, budgeting was developed a long time ago, and it was developed in an era where life was a little bit more predictable, just in day to day, week to week, and that still happens, I think, for a lot of people who might have families, because it's just hard to be more spontaneous when you have dependents and a spouse and stuff. So I think budgeting for young people has never really been invented until maybe now more modern day, where people like you and I are like, oh, hey, you don't have to do it that way.
Totally. And I also think that, I mean, spending is so frictionless. It's so easy, like just pulling out a debit card and swiping your card, that it actually makes even a little bit more sense to kind of be thinking about it on like a more day-to-day or week-to-week basis, because you all of a sudden pop up in your account and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe I had 20 transactions this week. And so I think it's actually good to check in more and be a little bit more flexible with a budget than, the old school days of like balancing a checkbook and spending exactly the same on each exact thing each month.
Yeah, balancing a checkbook, still something I don't know how to do. And
yeah, me neither.
Like my parents were like, you have to learn this. Like, these millennials don't know how to balance checkbook. And now I'm like, what's that, Mom? You use checks anymore? She still does, because she is old school.
Yeah, I know. I tried to get my mom to download Venmo the other day and she wasn't having it. But
okay, let's move on to the quick and dirty Q&A. We can wrap this up. I'm going to publish like this podcast as long as it goes, because I think it's so high value and entertaining, which is everything a podcast needs to be. But we're going to get into the confession time, and I feel like this is going to be super easy for you. Maybe not, but
let's hear it. Let's hear it.
What is one embarrassing money move you've made that maybe you're not super proud of, or something that you buy with your hard-earned cash that you're not super proud of, or something that you don't buy that maybe you shouldn't be so proud of? Because that's an eye for an eye. I'm going to share mine, and that has something to do with what I'm going to share today.
Well, so, I mean, in my 20s, I really started the story at like the point where I started dumpster dogging. But I think it's important to note that like before that, like I was like an incredible shithead with like very little money saved, except for like my 401k. But I had pretty much, other than the 401k, I had nothing to my name. And it's because I was out there spending money like a swashbuckling sailor. And so I'm trying to think of just like one example. Is hard, but like Tess, I'm gonna let you have it. I'm gonna let you have the most embarrassing one ever, because I feel like there can be ones where you're like saving face and like, oh, that's so embarrassing, but it's also kind of cute. Like, this is not cute at all. This is really embarrassing. So once there was this concert I really wanted to go to with a friend. It was sold out, and I found somebody on Craigslist to buy tickets from. I Western Union them money, and of course the tickets were a scam.
I mean, but like it's the like belief that they're gonna be real that makes it all
well.
worth
It's like I mean, looking back, I'm like, how fucking stupid could you be? Like, at what point? Why wouldn't I be like, okay, well, like, no, I'll bring you cash. Like, let's do like sending somebody a Western Union on Craigslist. Like, I was done with my money, but that's real dumb.
That's almost like you paying for that like prince from Africa to come over to the U.S.
I mean, totally. And it's like, well, I shouldn't even say this. It's like even more embarrassing if I tell you what band it is.
Tell us what band.
It was for Fish tickets.
I don't even know who that is.
Oh, they're like a jam band, and I like love to go to like hang out with these hippies at these jam band shows. But like, it's also like totally embarrassing, and I completely respect anybody that thinks that the music is garbage. And so there are people with like a lot of strong feelings about it, but it just makes the story like that much more stupid. That like for this stupid ass hippie concert, I Western Union some stranger some money and never got to go.
Can I ask how much money, if you remember?
I kind of don't remember, but I guarantee. I mean, resale value for these tickets, like, they're so popular and they always have such a following, which is like so wild. But I'm guessing each ticket was like at minimum, it was 2 tickets at minimum $75 each.
Okay. Well,
maybe $100.
Now you got a great story out of it. Okay, eye for an eye. So my one is something that I don't buy because I guess I'm naturally frugal at it, but it's also just because I'm pretty gross. I don't really wash my hair. So I know a lot of people spend a lot of money on like beauty products, especially when it comes to like shampoo and conditioner, taking care of themselves. I hate showering. I do it because I like to work out, and otherwise I would just be unlivable, unbearable to live with for my boyfriend. But I or myself, let's be real, even when I was single, I still showered, but I do like body showers. And I hate washing my hair. It's just something I think is a waste of time when it comes to drying it. It looks nasty probably 20%, 20 to 30% of the time. I try to do dry shampoo, but otherwise, and my dry shampoo is cornstarch, but I just don't buy shampoo and conditioner. Like I buy shampoo and conditioner probably I'm going on like once a year.
Respect. nothing but respect for that. See, that's a respectable story. My story was like the opposite of respect.
Don't worry, I've shared plenty of unrespectable stories. It's going to be hard going forward, like continuing to come up with like money confessions. So I'm just like, okay, I gotta get creative here. What else do I do that I shouldn't probably tell people?
Oh man! Well, if you ever need to dip into my well, let me know, and I'll pass you one of mine. Because actually one of my best performing. I write all of the time about investing, and nobody ever reads my blog posts on investing, even though it's like my area of expertise. But I wrote a post on like the 20 stupidest or most ridiculous things I ever wasted money on, and it was my most popular post I've ever had. So, anyways, feel free to dip into that well if you need.
It's so weird. It's people really want to like make it feel like they're not making such stupid decisions or something, or want to rationalize their stupid money decisions.
Fair enough.
Yeah, right. All right. Okay, moving on. What is one non-negotiable money indulgence that you refuse to cut from your non-budget life?
I would say going out to drinks with friends.
Cool. What is one less than $100 investment that you firmly believe has helped you get ahead?
I would have to say I mean, this is like such a cliche answer, but the first $100 that I saved for my trip. I could say the first $100 in my 401k because I also remember that. I remember starting the 401k, but like the first $100 that I set aside in a savings account for my trip for traveling, for quitting my job, was definitely like what kicked it all off. It was $100 that was a Christmas gift. And so it kicked it off that winter before. And it's what was kind of my inspiration to keep going.
What is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning and the last thing before bed?
Oh man. So I'm such a piece of shit in the morning. So I really live like that freelance lifestyle. Like I actually work better at night. I'm definitely more of a night person. And so generally in the morning, I'm like reading. I like to read in the morning. I like to listen to a podcast, make my coffee, maybe go for a run. Just really ease into the day. I'm like not one of these like type A people that's like snorting an Adderall and taking a cold shower by 5:45 a.m. to get their day started. That's not me.
I feel like I'm snorting an Adderall right now just by talking to you. So, I mean, with our time difference, it's very early in the morning for me, probably pretty late at night for you now.
10 o'clock, 10. Yeah, about 10.
Yeah, I rolled out of bed about 5 and I was like, can I do this? And I'm so glad I did. Now I'm like wired. I'm ready to go to my Italian school.
Yay! Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're up that early. That's crazy.
And what is the last thing you do before bed?
Oh, depends on the night. That's such a stupid joke. I wish I didn't say that.
No one said that though. That's great.
But usually like when I'm being a good girl, I'm reading, and when I'm being a bad girl, I'm scrolling on my phone. Let's be honest.
Yeah. We all have those days. Okay, book, app, your favorite tool, whatever, something you would recommend for the listeners. So if it's money related, bonus points. If not, whatever.
Sure. So, sorry, book, app, or tool. Is that what we said?
Yep.
Okay, so a really good book, which like I wish there was like a more fun book out there on investing that I could recommend, but in general they're like all pretty dry and like written by like dusty old white guys. But if you can understand everything that John Bogle, who created Vanguard, has written in his book, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing, then you would be doing a really, really good job. And so that'll be my book recommendation.
Awesome. Okay, Amanda, it has been such a pleasure having you on. Seriously, I haven't even had coffee yet, and I feel amazing, ready to go start my day. So that is great in and of itself. I think you made investing way more than just bearable to listen to from your tips, and I think everyone needs to go read your blog because you're a really good writer, and I love all the personality that you put behind it. Tell us where we can find you, specifically your blog, but anywhere else that you want people to come stalk you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I feel like I talked way too much, so feel free to edit me down. I'll do that sometimes. But yeah, if you wanted to find more, so the blog is dumpsterdogblog.com. You can always contact me there if you need. And like Tess said, I put up blog posts about all sorts of things, whether it's investing or other personal financial topics or other just fun stuff. On Instagram and on Twitter, I'm Dumpster Doggy. On Instagram, it's dumpster.doggy. On Twitter, it's just Dumpster Doggy. And so I try to be pretty active there. I'm trying to pick up my social media game. But at the very least, what you can do is find out when I put out new blog posts on those two different mediums. Now, my business is Invested Development, so my Facebook page is Invested Develop. If you search for that, there you can also get blog posts, and that's nice because you can click right through. Also, you can send me a message on any of those platforms. Invested Development, like I said, is my business where I do workshops. So if you have, for instance, if you work for a corporation or a small company and you want to bring me in to do an Invested Development talk or Investing 101, reach out to me on any of the platforms. I also just did the trial run for my course. So I'm going to have a course coming out, an official course on investing specifically, which I'm really excited about. And so, yeah, so just find me on any of the social medias, be in contact, and let me know if I can answer any questions or help you in any way.
Woo woo. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thank you, Tess.